Prophecies foretell an alliance of a one-world religion and a world government just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ and the Battle of Armageddon. On today's edition of End of the Age, I will show how this union, which is forming now, and revealing that we are truly living in the end time. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me on Tuesday's edition of End of the Age. Do you ever get the feeling that your attention is drawn over this way and there's a lot of huckus and ruckus going on, but you think, man, there's something in the background going on and I really don't know what it is? Well, that's happening a lot, not just in our society, but around the world. Prophetically speaking, the enemy would love to keep your eyes focused over here while he's implementing his goals and his world government, his world religion and things around here on the back corner. Well, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to reveal some of that today because that's happening. And it lets us know that we are just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 through 8, it foretells the establishment of a one world government and the leader of that one world government, the Antichrist. And in this chapter, the world government is symbolized as a seven-headed, ten-horned beast. In Revelation 13, 11 through 15, just down in the chapter a little bit, it foretells his partner, the Antichrist partner in the end time, the false prophet, which will rule the one world religious system at that time. And Revelation 17 provides further insight for this prophecy. Revelation 17:3 says, "So he carried me away in the Spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit on a scarlet-colored beast full of the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns." So it's a union of politics and religion just in the end time, the union of a world government and a world religious system. So this vision that John was given in Revelation 13 and in 17, and that's what it's a prophecy of, is the union of politics and religion in the end time. This vision in Revelation 17 is of a woman riding on the back of a 7-headed, 10-horned beast. And it's symbolic of that union of politics and religion. So let me explain. The question is, number one, who is the woman in Revelation 17? And then let me explain, give you a little background here, and then I'll get into what's going on this week. So who's the woman in Revelation 17? Well, God always uses a woman to symbolize a church in Scripture. In Bible prophecy, a beast always represents a nation or the ruler of that nation. So the 7-headed, 10-horned beast in Revelation 13 and 17 represents the union of many nations that will form a world governing body in the end time. On the other hand, in Scripture, like I said, God always uses a woman to symbolize a church. So the true church of Jesus Christ is depicted as a virgin, an uncompromised entity. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2 says, "For I am jealous over you with a godly jealousy, for I have espoused you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ." He's talking about the true church here, an uncompromised entity, only serves the Lord Jesus Christ alone. Well, on the other hand, a false church or a backslidden church is referred to as a woman, but she's not depicted as a virgin, but as a harlot, a woman of ill repute. When Israel, in the Old Testament, backslid, God said that she committed whoredom. For example, in Judges chapter 2, verse 17, the Bible says, and yet they would not hearken unto their judges, but they went a-whoring after other gods and bowed themselves unto them. They turned quickly out of their way, which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandments of the Lord, but they did not so. So the prophecy of a harlot, which in Revelation 17 is the worldwide false church, riding a seven-headed, ten-horned beast, the world government. Remember, from Revelation 13, the seven-headed, ten-horned beast is the world government. This shows a picture of the false church riding on the back of the world government, and it's simply describing this alliance of these two that will occur in the very near future, the merger of politics and religion, the world government and the world religious system. Well, folks, let me tell you, this is happening now, and it's been happening for decades now, actually, but we're really seeing it come into light in a huge way. It's being illuminated in the world, this merger of world religion and the world government. And so when we get back, I got a little bit more detail to give you, and then we'll go into what's happening right now in this merger, this future union of politics and religion. You're definitely going to want to hear, so don't turn that dial.
The End Time Prophecy Tour was the most wonderful tour. I would like to thank Irvin and Judy Baxter for a fabulous trip to Israel. I know it took much effort and planning to make it successful. What a tremendous time we all had, which warrants a great big thank you. You can't encapsulate it into words. You can't capture it with a photograph. You just have to experience Israel yourself. The Queen of Sheba said, "The half has not been told." I concur. What an awesome experience to visit the land of Bible history and see it come alive as you walk its paths. I shall be forever changed. Dale from Louisiana.
Join us October 25th through November 5th, 2018. You too can experience Israel with Irvin and Judy Baxter. Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 to sign up today.
If ever people need to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for End Time Magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will really impact your life. End Time has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that End Time Magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctors' offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine has done in many lives. Call 1-800-363-8463. That's 1-800-END-TIME and get your subscription today.
So in talking about this merger, of the world religious system, the world government in the end time, let's first get into the world government aspect of it before we get into the religious or the church aspect of it, and then we'll get into what's going on this week in a very high level. So the world government, with a communistic agenda, driving the mechanics of the world government or the United Nations. You say, whoa, communistic, that's a pretty harsh word. Well, that's what's going on. A communistic, socialistic, that's the mechanics, that's the ideology of the United Nations now. And it always has been. So with that in mind, it's easy to see how the global elites have been able to work from within the United Nations to quietly build a world governing system. A socialist world government is the goal, and promoting belief in global warming That's one of the number one ways to reach the goal. That's why they push. Now, there are many ways. Disarmament, there's a lot of different things that they push. Wealth redistribution. But in order to get a lot of these things passed, they've chosen one of the main things is global warming, which leads to climate change. They preach and preach and preach that. And I'll get into, I'll tell you, it's all about wealth redistribution at the end of the day. And I'll get into that here in a second. But when we talk about the United Nations being socialistic, the United Nations Charter was written by Alger Hiss, who was a convicted communist spy. And which means that the UN was designed to be a socialistic one world government from its inception. That's never changed. Not one word of that charter that was written by a convicted communist spy has ever changed to this day. So it still runs off of that charter, and the leaders of the world, they believe in that socialistic ideology, okay? And you wonder why they fight Donald Trump so much. He's a capitalist. All these leaders are socialistic, and the bought and paid for media, they're all against Donald Trump. Well, they believe in socialistic ideas. And when Donald Trump came along, they all started heaving and hoeing about it. And so you think about what's really going on in the world. Well, one of the core belief systems of socialism is that most conflict in society stems from an ever-broadening group, or let's say the gap between the wealthy and the poor. And their contention is that the wealthy are the ruling class and will inevitably use their economic power to enforce their will upon the less fortunate. The ultimate socialist solution to this problem is to abolish private property ownership, for the state to own all principal means of production, with the central government redistributing the wealth evenly among the masses. And the result would be you've seen it in communistic countries, a classless communistic society where a global government would ensure equality for all citizens, which never works. Government down, no. So it would be impossible to fully realize the dream of a communistic or socialistic one world government without the redistribution of wealth. The redistribution of wealth is the major plank in a socialistic or a communistic society. What usually happens, though, is everybody ends up being poor, and just the government ends up being very rich. That's usually what happens, and that's why it's never been successful in any country ever. So the redistribution of wealth and what they're trying to do on a global stage is the redistribution of wealth from the developed nations to the poor, underdeveloped nations of the world. That's what's going on in our world today. And the United Nations thinks that it's the best one, these global leaders, that they're the best ones to manage that. And this is the main goal of the global warming climate change hoax, capital H-O-A-X. The global warming climate change ideology, this spin that's going on, it's a total hoax, everybody. God controls the climate, not the government, not a scientist, not anyone else. The CO2 emissions they say we're putting off that's causing the earth to warm and all these tornadoes, hurricanes, whatever. No. God controls all of that. So the global warming climate change spin that's being put up by the United Nations, it is a hoax. So the United Nations elites, however, they know that this is a perpetual global life-threatening crisis, that it's necessary to have something like that to convince wealthy nations to get people so stirred up that they would accept a punitive the cost of cap and trade taxes, and to pledge billions of dollars to help poorer countries make the transition to low carbon development and growth, and to become more resilient to those impacts of climate change, quote unquote, climate change, which is not, the climate has changed every day from the beginning of time, everybody. It rained this morning. It's sunny outside today here in Dallas. It'll be sunny tomorrow. The climate's going to change every day. But they need this crisis to scare everybody into redistributing the wealth. And so wealth redistribution is exactly what carbon cap and trade laws are designed to accomplish. The government will set a cap on the amount of carbon emissions that an industrialized nation can emit. If the limit is exceeded, carbon credits can be purchased from underdeveloped nations who have more credits than they need. So think about that though. That does not solve their so-called crisis. It just redistributes wealth. See what I'm talking about? But the fact is, everybody, it's a hoax. CO2 emissions have nothing to do with global warming. The global warming fear-mongering is simply a scheme that's put together by the global elites to redistribute the wealth of the world and to move us into a world government, which is prophesied to occur in the end time. So with that said, now you understand what's going on in the mind of the global elites. We've got to push this global warming, climate change. You say, well, hold on a minute, Dave. There's scientific studies. There are scientific studies that are bought and paid for by the ones who want you to believe this spin. The International Panel on Climate Change, they put out all these studies about global warming, which has led to climate change and different things, but they've been proven to be wrong time and time again. It's all a big hoax. So you say, well, what's going on right now? What's the reason for this program today? Well, now that you know what's going on with the global elites and why they push the global warming climate change scam to redistribute the wealth of the world, this week, the Exclusive reported that the Pope is going to convene with the big oil and investors to talk climate change. You say, well, hold on a minute. I thought that the world government was pushing global warming, which leads to climate change. Well, remember I talked about in prophecy, the Bible says there's going to be a merger of politics and religion. So, Pope Francis, and I'll talk about his encyclical in great depth today. He wrote an encyclical a couple, 2 or 3 years ago that was devoted to climate change and pushing that global warming climate change agenda. Because the popes, for many decades, have called for a world governing body, a global political authority to manage the so-called mess. All the different, the economic problems, the political problems between nations, the economic problems, the religious problems. We need a global political authority to manage this. The global warming climate change crisis that's going on. They believe the world government can manage this. Think about that. So, what's going on this week? Well, Pope Francis is hosting a gathering this week at the Vatican with executives of major oil producers and investment firms to talk about how the companies can address climate change, according to several people familiar with the event. So why does it matter? Well, it's one of the most significant developments showing how corporations are working with world leaders on climate change amid President Trump's whole-scale retreat on the issue. Last year, you'll remember, Trump announced that the United States would withdraw America from the Paris climate deal, which now has support from every country on the planet except the United States. Now, 3 years ago, Pope Francis wrote in an encyclical, which is a papal letter sent to all bishops of the Roman Catholic Church, on the importance of addressing climate change, and it was a first in the church's history. And so the big picture is that the Pope, companies like BlackRock and big oil companies are increasingly focusing on climate change. So you've got the leader of the Catholic Church who's having all these big oil businesses over to the Vatican to talk global warming, climate change. And they're focusing on climate change as cleaner sources of energy have become more competitive. The impacts of a warmer world have become more apparent, and public pressure to address the issue mounts. And this meeting reflects the convergence of that. The details is in that the focus of the gathering is similar to the encyclical on care for our common home, with an emphasis on the energy transition of a shared home. According to people that are familiar with it, this event occurring this week, with two people saying that the Pope is likely to talk on Saturday. So, the Pope is having all these big businesses come into the Vatican. He's talking about global warming, which leads to climate change, and he's going to share the spin. You say, well, how do you know he's putting a spin on it? Because I studied the encyclical that he wrote that they're referring to in great detail. I read it several times. It was tens of thousands of words. It was like, my eyeballs were falling out by the time I read the thing so many times. But it was so much about giving the spin of global warming, which leads to climate change, and then the solution to that, a global political authority to manage it all. We need to yield up our sovereignty to international agreements and different things. Go with the Earth Charter. And it was all about world government, scaring everybody, giving the global warming, climate change scare tactic, and then here's the solution, a global government. So let's get off. I wanted today to get off into the encyclical a little bit. Make sure I go back through that with you, because if you don't understand this will happen right before your very eyes, and you can't see the forest for the trees. You've got to understand the Bible prophesies that all of this is going to happen. Like I said, for decades now, the popes have called for a global political authority to manage the economy. Now they're calling that we need a global political authority to manage climate change, which, folks, it's not really. The climate has been changing. God controls the temperature dial. We don't. And so this is what we got to talk about. This is prophecy, the ongoing fulfillment of this merger, where the leader of this global religious system is propping up this world governing entity. You remember in Revelation chapter 17:3, where there was a woman riding on the back of the seven-headed, ten-horned beast, this merger of politics and religion. This is the ongoing fulfillment of that prophecy. So let's talk about the encyclical, because if you haven't heard this is going to blow your mind a little bit. I went over it originally, but I want to do it again because you need to understand this merger, because you could get, if you don't understand it, you could get caught up in it. And that's something you absolutely will not want to do in the future. So the Pope's global agenda, it's spelled out very clearly in the encyclical. It's a call for a global government. It's Revelation 17:3 all over. It's what the woman sitting on the beast was symbolizing. So you must understand that fear is an emotion caused by the threat of danger. And if you get in fear mode, you'll do things that you'll never do when you're thinking rationally. If I can get you scared enough, you'll give me all your money, you'll give me whatever. You just say, take whatever, just don't hurt my life or my family. You'll get in fear mode. So for thousands of years, fear has been used by, you name it, pharaohs, kings, monarchs, emperors, caliphates, presidents even, politicians, and even religious leaders to enslave the populace. And over time, the process has been refined, but the objective has never changed. It's all about control, control, control. If I can get you scared enough, whether what I'm talking about is real or not, if I can get you scared enough, I can get you to do things that I would never be able to get you to do when you're thinking with a sane mind. So in today's society, the concept is simple and has been extremely successful. All they do is they'll promote a crisis, whether it's real or imagined, which creates fear among the people. I could name several of them. Once that is established, though, once this crisis is established, they'll declare that government oversight and gross taxation, surveillance, increased regulation. I mean, like a terrorist. Think about terrorism in the world, just for one example. And they can, now you've got to give basically your blood to get on a plane anymore. I mean, you're getting pat downs by Homeland Security. I mean, it's crazy, all in the name of security, because people got in fear mode. I don't want to get on a plane. Before 911, you just walked right through the airport, got on a plane. I mean, it was easy. But now people get in fear mode, and they'll take their shoes off, their socks, their belt. I mean, they're just tell me, they go to Homeland Security. Tell me what you want me to take off. Think about it. All in the name of security, because they got in fear mode after 911. And these people, and so if they can get you in fear mode, now they'll get you to where, hey, the only solution is surveillance, and I mean, gild up your sovereignty more and more in the name of security, because you're in fear mode. So you see, the goal all along is greater dependency on government as the citizen's protector and provider. But the fact of the matter is, folks, it leads to more control. And that's going to be the method of the Antichrist. His whole goal is to get you under control and to get you to pledge allegiance to him and his world governing system. So the crisis is used by a president, politician. I'm talking about in today's society. President, a politician, a religious leader, as a means to an end. So, with that said, consider the global warming or the climate change hoax. And that's being promulgated worldwide. Global elites around the world are spreading the deception that mankind has caused the surface of a planet to increase in temperature due to greenhouse gases or carbon dioxide that humans have emitted. And the fact of the matter is, it's a total hoax, everybody. And so when we get back from the break, I'll give you more information
Let me tell you
concerning
today
this.
about our exciting Armageddon collection. What does the term Armageddon mean? Why is it so important in Bible prophecy in the last days? And what will happen between now and then? In our Armageddon collection, we cover subjects such as events of the final 7 years, the revealing of the Antichrist, the mark of the beast, and the world's greatest revival just ahead. In this special collection, you will receive the DVD, Seeds of Armageddon, November 29, 2012, our 8-lesson series, From Here to Armageddon, along with a PDF of our 7-year timeline, and our informative DVD, First Step to Armageddon, December 23rd, 2016. All of this for your gift of $140 or more, plus the cost of shipping and handling. To order your Armageddon collection, go to endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463.
The End Time Prophecy Tour was the most wonderful tour. What an awesome experience to visit the land of Bible history and see it come alive as you walk its paths. I shall be forever changed. Dale from Louisiana.
Join us October 25th through November 5th, 2018. You too can experience Israel with Irvin and Judy Baxter. Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME to sign up today.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archive button.
So before I get off into this segment, I want to give you just one proof that the global warming, climate change is a scam. And I've got stacks of stuff. I've had people send me books that they've written. I mean, I've got documentation. You couldn't read it all. That the fact is that from documented scientists, from people that are legit, over college science programs and different things, that's saying it's simply not true. So what they say is that humans are emitting so many CO2 emissions that it's causing the temperatures of the earth to rise, which has led to tsunamis and hurricanes and earthquakes and tornadoes and all these different things, and that we need to decrease the amount of CO2 that we're emitting. And they say because once we've hit the industrial age that this is really spiked and that the amount of CO2 is going up and it's causing the temperatures to rise, and that's what's the problem. So we need the developed nations are the problem. So what they need to do is they need to, through these carbon credit taxes and the commitments that they've made through the Paris Climate Agreement, this $100 billion a year, they're going to redistribute the wealth of the world, and somehow that's going to fix the problem. It's not going to fix any problem. The fact of the matter is it's all about wealth redistribution, which is one of the major planks of socialism. But if you look at it, let me just give you one proof. Think of it like this. Think of Greenland. The Norse Vikings arrived in Greenland around 980 A.D., and they were able to farm the land at that point. Now, you picture in your mind where Greenland's at. They were able to farm the land in 980 A.D. However, due to the rapidly cooling climate, they were forced to leave, and by the mid-15th century, their settlements were abandoned. Couldn't farm the land anymore. Currently, 80% of Greenland is covered in ice, which means that it was much warmer when the Vikings were there than it is today. So, did the Vikings have coal-burning plants emitting CO2, causing everything to warm up at that point? No, it got colder after that. Did they have large SUVs? No, emitting these emissions. No, they did not. And yet the global warming alarmists say that these are the cause for global warming and that they must be abolished. We must go to electric cars, and we must go to natural gas and all these solar energy sources. The fact of the matter is, it was warmer back then than it is now. So it's just a complete ruse, everybody. All it is global warming, which leads to climate change, which is a hoax being put out by the world government to scare you into redistributing the wealth from developed nations to underdeveloped nations. So, what do we have to do? What do they do right now? They establish the crisis. So, we're talking about the encyclical letter from the Pope. An encyclical letter from the Pope that is normally sent to a particular set of Catholic bishops. However, Pope Francis stated in this encyclical that was put out in June of 2015 that he said this specifically: now faced as we are with the global environmental deterioration, I wish to address every person living on the planet. So instead of just the Catholic bishops, this is going out to every person on the planet. So according to Pope Francis, in the encyclical, human-induced, now remember, this is being put out by the world government, not the encyclical, but this message of global warming, climate change. It's all about wealth redistribution. Well, listen to the encyclical. According to Pope Francis, human-induced global warming is causing the global environment deterioration, which leads to climate change. Now, I'm quoting here from the encyclical. A very solid scientific consensus indicates that we are presently witnessing a disturbing warming of the climatic system. In recent decades, now this is the spin that's being put out. In recent decades, this warming has been accomplished by a constant rise in the sea level, it would appear, by an increase of extreme weather events, even if a scientifically determinable cause cannot be assigned to each particular phenomenon. In other words, it's all just under the umbrella of climate change. So everything that happens, a hailstorm, a bad snowstorm, anything, whether it's even though it's called global warming, which leads to climate change, they've actually stated that these polar shifts that have happened and all these different real bad ice storms and different things that have set records over the last several years, those were caused by global warming, which leads to climate change. So he went on to say in the encyclical, humanity is called to recognize the need for changes of lifestyle, production, and they have a plan for this. We want you to change your lifestyle. We want you to change your production and your consumption how much electricity you use in your home, how much water, what you do with the water on your property. Can you build a pond or a tank on your property, or can you not? And we want to be able to tell you whether you can or can't, how many times you flush your toilet, everything. They want to control every aspect of your life. And if they can get you scared enough, you will allow them to do that. So in order to combat this warming or at least the human, they say, the human causes which produce or aggravate it, it is true that there are other factors such as, this is from the encyclical, such as volcanic activity, variations. In other words, maybe a few other things that could add to global warming, which leads to climate change. Variations in the Earth's orbit or axis of the solar cycle. Yet a number of scientific studies indicate that most global warming in recent decades is due to the great concentration of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen oxides, and others, released mainly as a result of human activity. Okay, that's where we get into an issue. Remember what I talked to you about Greenland? Those guys didn't have coal-fired plants. And they didn't have SUVs and semis and all this other stuff that were putting off all these CO2. Yet it was warmer then than it is now. So this is a spin, folks. This is a spin that was put out in the encyclical. He goes on to say, climate change is a global problem with grave implications. Environmental, social, economic implications. You start touching somebody's pocketbook, you get them scared enough, they'll yield up their rights in the name of security. Political and for the distribution of goods. It represents one of the principal challenges facing humanity in our day. So, folks, that's the crisis you see. And a lot of people put a lot of faith in the Pope as a religious leader. So when he puts out an encyclical, they started saying, well, hold on now. This global warming, climate change, there must be something to that. And I don't know Pope Francis personally, and so, he's working with people to get these things done. Don't know for sure. I just know that he also talked at the United Nations in 2015 when this was put out, at the Sustainable Development Goals, when they were adopted. Pope Francis spoke there. And so he's very influential in getting this stuff passed because he believes in a global political authority. So to say that Pope Francis has bought into the environmental catastrophe, fear-mongering tactics of the global elite, well, that's an understatement. The entire encyclical was about how humans are destroying the planet, and we need a global political authority to manage this situation and get it under control. So the encyclical proceeds to expound on, in great detail, I might add, the impact that this crisis will have on the earth and the inhabitants thereof. Now, I've got to remind you that the global warming climate change forecast being sold to us by the news media, the United Nations, and Pope Francis, it's simply not happening. But nevertheless, internationalists view global warming and climate change as the perfect scheme because every time, like I say, every time a hurricane, a flood, a heat wave, a polar vortex, that's the word I was looking at for earlier, a polar vortex, a real bad ice storm, let's say. So a heat wave or an ice storm, think about it, or some other catastrophe, climate catastrophe occurs, they can blame it on the unstable environment and say, hey, you're putting off too many carbon emissions, you're causing this. You can't control yourself, so we as internationalists or globalists, leaders of the world government, we need to manage you. We need to control you, keep you in check. And folks, I must remind you that control and freedom, two different things. You say, well, hey, I'm going to have freedom if I yield up my sovereignty in the name of security. I'll have more freedom at that point. No. There's strings attached to all of this. It's all about control at the end of the day. And it is a perpetual crisis. They need the perpetual crisis because they've always got to keep everybody in crisis mode. I mean, think about what's going on here in the United States over the last several year or two. Year or 3 or 4 or 5. They got everybody stirred up and had all these riots and different things. And then they ended up tearing down many of our statues to people like General Lee and things like that. They went around tearing all them down because people got scared and thought we were having huge problems. And I mean, when they use fear tactics, people will do things they never would have done when they were thinking with a rational mind. So the global warming climate change is the perpetual crisis, which can be used to keep the citizens of the world in a constant state of fear. That is the goal. What would Rahm Emanuel say? He said, and Hillary Clinton, you never want to waste a good crisis. You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And he said, what I mean by that is an opportunity to do things that you didn't think that you could do before. And he's saying, hey, in the time of crisis mode, you get everybody scared to death, and we can tax them, we can do whatever we want to do in the name of security. That's what the carbon taxes are all about. And with this in mind, one has to ask, why the crisis? It's not true. Well, after reading the entire encyclical that was put out in 2015 in its entirety, the answer became crystal clear to me. And that is found in the proposed solution to this imaginary problem. In the encyclical, the Pope, in many ways, promoted a world government to manage humans because they couldn't manage themselves. The concept is this, is that humans cannot manage or will not manage themselves. Therefore, they must be governed by a select group of more disciplined or better educated humans, i.e. globalist or internationalist. And since the supposed global warming and climate change hoax is affecting the entire planet, then a global management solution is mandatory to regulate every aspect of life for each person on the earth. In the encyclical, Pope Francis advocated, in more ways than one, just such a global governing system in order to save the planet from themselves and from the disfigurement, quote unquote, disfigurement and destruction of creation. So when we get back from the break, I'll tell you how he did that and show you how he asked for a world governing body, this global political authority. And you can see the merger taking place now, prophesied in the Bible 2,000 years ago, in the end time of politics and religion.
We live in critical times. If the final 7 years started today, would you know what to do? God's people need to understand the prophecies that are taking place. Daniel 11:33 says, "And they that understand among the people shall instruct many." To guide the people around us, we must first receive instruction ourselves on the biblical prophecies of the end time. End Time Ministries is introducing the End Time 1000. We have created Jerusalem Prophecy College online to help you be ready to inform those around you. The goal is to have at least 1,000 people prepared to instruct others. By joining the End Time 1000, you can fulfill Daniel 11:33. Sign up for Jerusalem Prophecy College online and be equipped to guide your friends and loved ones during the final 7 years. Go to JerusalemProphecyCollege.com. That's JerusalemProphecyCollege.com.
So, in the encyclical, the Pope called for, and this is the encyclical Laudato Si, which you can read. You can go online and read the whole thing. See exactly what I'm talking about. Every time he called for a world government, he actually calls for a world government in many different ways. He talks about we need sustainable development. Sustainable development is mentioned over 20 times in the encyclical. We need sustainable policies put in place in schools and in cities and different things that we can control people because people are consuming too many things. So he talked about sustainable development. He talked about the Earth Charter, which called for a global political authority in the end. He talked about enforceable international agreements, i.e. the Paris Climate Agreement, that would force nations to control, or they would commit themselves to lowering their CO2 emissions over time. And it's in Agenda 2030 that they would, by the year 2030, that they would try to get a grip on the climate change crisis that's going on in the world. So he called specifically many times for a world government. He also called right out in the open, we need a world political authority. And it states this in the encyclical. He says, given this situation, it is this global warming, climate change situation that's going on in the world, it is essential to devise stronger and more efficient organized international institutions or global governing bodies with functionaries who are appointed fairly by agreement among national governments. You and I do not have a vote in that. They wanted the leaders of nations around the world to gather and supposedly vote on them, and that are empowered to impose sanctions on nations for not complying. And then he says, as Benedict XVI has affirmed in continuity with the social teachings of the Church, of the Catholic Church, to manage the global economy, to revive economies hit by the crisis, to avoid any deterioration of the present crisis and greater imbalances that would result, to bring about the integral and timely disarmament. Now, we're talking about global warming, climate change here, folks. And he throws in integral and timely disarmament, food security, and peace to guarantee the protection of the environment and to regulate migration. If you walk right down the Sustainable Development Goals, most of them are included in that. So now we're talking about global warming, climate change, which they say has led to a lot of the migration around the world. People have had to leave because they can't raise their crops because of climate change. He says, for all of this, there is an urgent need of a true world political authority, as his predecessor, Blessed John 23rd, indicated some years ago. And like I said, for years, the popes, for decades now, the popes have advocated a world government. They've called for a world government, a global political authority to manage all these supposed crises in the world. And so finally, here it is in plain English. The objective of the entire encyclical is a global political authority. Now, the reason I went through the encyclical, and believe me, I skimmed it for you. That was the treetop version, because it was all devoted to the crisis of global warming, completion, climate change needs to be managed by a world government. Well, that's exactly what they're going to be talking about with this meeting at the Vatican with the Pope and all these big oil companies. He's going to be trying to sell them on the fact that this is a huge crisis in the world, and they say that the liberals say that, well, hey, the oil companies they're spending big dollars to prove that global warming, climate change is a hoax because they don't want to have to give up their, they're going to lose big money if we go away from oil and then all these other different things. The fact of the matter is it's simply not true. Sure, over time, the temperature of the earth has risen and it's gotten cooler. It's risen, it's gotten cooler. The fact of the matter is, neither you nor I, nor any global leader or a group of global leaders can control that. There is a God that controls everything at the end of the day. He controls the temperature. He controls whether it rains or it doesn't rain, or whether it's 90 degrees out or it's 50, or ice comes through here this afternoon. God controls that. It's not the emissions that we're putting off. This is all a hoax, everybody. So, at the end of the day, They want a world political authority. You can see how Pope Francis and all of the for several decades now, all of the popes have called for, you can go online and look up the quotes of the popes for several decades now who have supported a world governing body. Pope Francis is the same. So he's promoting this world government. So the fact is the crisis really is irrelevant. Whether it's global cooling back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, they were, Newsweek, different magazines were running articles on the coming ice age. Now think about it. This was just, 50, 60 years ago. And now we've went from global cooling, whether it's that or an economic collapse, immigration. Think about things that come in the news. They start preaching, there's going to be an economic collapse, and everybody stops dealing in the stock market and people pull their money out of the bank. I mean, all they got to do is throw a spin out there and the economy starts going into a shutdown mode. Just because somebody started saying there's going to be an economic collapse, even though there may not have going to be one. They can control what you do because of fear. And immigration, any kind of crisis, the threat of a nuclear war, food shortages, plagues, whether they're real or imagined, it doesn't matter what the crisis is. As long as they have a crisis and it produces fear, the global elite will use it to promote their one world government. And that is the goal of the encyclical that was put out by Pope Francis in 2015. And now you can see what's going to be used. They said it in the article that I talked about. At this coming meeting at the Vatican with these big oil companies, they said it's going to go along the lines of the encyclical. And it's him saying, look, we've got a crisis on our hands and we need a world political authority to manage this. That's what he's going to be talking about all these big oil companies about. So, look at it. It's prophecy being fulfilled. The prophesied one world government. We know that global warming is just a ruse by the global elite to establish a world government. Pope Francis is advocating a true world political authority to manage this supposed crisis. And the Bible foretells that in the end time, the world will be ruled by a world government. This global political authority will demand the allegiance of all world citizens, and it's going to endeavor to control every aspect of their lives. Folks, that's what the Sustainable Development Goals are all about. The Obama administration signed us onto that in 2015. And President Trump is backing us off of a lot of that. The Paris Climate Agreement was a commitment. The Sustainable Development Goals were signed in September of 2015. The Paris Climate Agreement was signed in December of 2015. And it was commitments from the nations of the world to implement these climate change, reduction of CO2 emissions because of this so-called crisis. But it was wealth redistribution. They committed billions of dollars, like $100 billion a year, towards helping underdeveloped nations and all this with their crisis management and climate change management, things like that. It was all about wealth redistribution at the end of the day. Well, now you can see, and the world government system was being set up piece by piece. Well, then when Donald Trump come along and said, we're going to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement, you can see why all the liberals were screaming to high heaven. And I mean, all of them, Macron, I mean, you name it, Angela Merkel, all of the elitists, these global governing elitists, they were just howling at the moon because Donald Trump was pulling us out of that and wasn't going to comply. Well, without the United States complying, then the world government, I mean, it kind of, it's kind of, they were at odds big time. And so the articles I'm reading now and I'm doing research on is that Europe is willing to completely step in and take over that, the leadership of this world governing body. I've got a huge article. I may go over it on Thursday with y'all because that's the ongoing fulfillment as well. The powers, the United States is not going to be involved in the world government. the powers are going to swing to Europe. We're watching that happening as we speak. But think about this. In that vein right there, you need to know that there are a lot of people here in the United States, businesses, colleges, all kinds of people who still support the world government, and they're still involved in it. And if I can get everything together, I'll try to do a program on that on Thursday, because you need to know that that's total ongoing fulfillment of prophecy. So in order for there to be a complete obeisance among the populace to this world government, a world religious system will be established to advocate devotion to the world governing system. It's told Revelation 13:15 and Revelation 17:3. That's what those are symbolic of, these prophecies. The merger of a world government and a world religion. They will advocate the devotion to the world governing system by all the religions of the world. And it appears that we are witnessing just such a merger right before our very eyes. So it's important that we understand the timing of all of this. And one thing I will tell you about, I just we're publishing a huge timeline in our July, August edition of End Time magazine. I have never seen a timeline like this, and I've studied this stuff for years. I've never seen a timeline like this ever. It takes you through the prophecies from the Messiah all the way to when we go off into eternity after the great white throne of judgment. And the prophecies, fulfilled prophecies up to a certain point, and then it says, you are here, and then it goes through the ones you'll be watching for in the near future. There's like 53 of them total. It's going to be in our July, August edition of End Time magazine. Well, on the timeline, this grand scheme of things, we know that just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, over the last several years, that this world government and world religion is going to be in complete, total power of the earth. And there's going to be pockets of resistance. We know there's many nations that won't come under that, but the ones that He does control, this world government and world religion are going to be united and running that. The Bible gives us a clear picture of that in the end time. And so we're there. We are at the time when this is supposed to be happening, and it's been happening for years. But the Antichrist isn't going to come along and start a world government and get it up and running and going in the last 3.5 years. It's going to already be established. Well, we're there. And there will come a time in the near future. Right now, the United Nations, the world governing body, doesn't have the real teeth that they want. But there will come a time in the near future, probably on the other side of the Sixth Trumpet War or World War III, they will gain the teeth. I don't know if they're going to do away with the UN Security Council veto power. I don't know how it's going to happen. But they will gain the teeth they want. And when the Antichrist is revealed at the abomination of desolation, he is going to usurp authority over that world governing body. And that's when, over the last 3.5 years, he'll dole out the mark of the beast, and the Great Tribulation is going to be perpetrated. A lot of things are going to happen, but we're watching the ongoing fulfillment of these prophecies as we speak. And today we talked about the merger of politics and religion in the end time.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of End Time Ministries.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page.